Hey, where's Emily?
I kicked her out 4 hours ago because she just wouldn't frickin' listen to me. That ought to teach her to always do what I tell her, eh?
What the hell are you talking about? I had so many things I wanted to say to my husband, but now was not the time. My maternal protective instincts immediately kicked, and I ran out of the house with such speed my vision blurred for a solid moment. I found myself plowing through blowing snow, and I looked around frantically for my daughter, but I couldn't find her at all. And my heart was on the verge of going ballistic as I began to suspect the worst had happened. Oh, please, please, no. Emily! Where are you? This is the story of how my own husband did the unthinkable to his own child and how the consequences cost him dearly for his mistake. My name is Grace Vader, and I work in bookkeeping for a nationwide pastry conglomerate. I used to live with my husband, Winston, and my daughter, Emily. I first met my husband during our university days when we were in the same club together. He was a good-natured guy, but he had a terrible habit of being a little self-centered and fussy. But when it's important, he can be considerate of those around him. And when he is that person, he can be the most charming man on the planet. That's initially what got me attracted to him. And I was lucky enough to be his target of infatuation, and after 5 years of dating, we got married. After that, Winston asked me to become a full-time housewife, so I quit my job and became what he asked me to be. A year later, I was blessed with a child, and her name was Emily. When she was born, my husband was so in love with her, and he was very attached to his daughter. He took care of her and helped me a lot, but to be honest, there were a lot of things that annoyed me both with him and my baby Emily. Like when he came home from work a couple of times in the evening, he took Emily away from me right when I was breastfeeding her, and he would wake her up in the process. And she was evidently upset and started squirming and crying with no believable end in sight. I tried to warn him about doing that again, but he took offense and started making a pretty big fuss about nonsense that couldn't be further from the truth. In other words, it was completely pointless to try and argue with him, so after that, I stopped interfering in what he was doing. I didn't want to waste all my time just fighting with him in front of my child. 2 years later, as Emily grew quite a bit and became able to talk, she started to have her own personality and began to rebel more and more. And I was happy that she had grown up, but Winston was not. Things with him were now different. When Emily was in her rebellious stage, he stopped caring about her because she always seemed to go against what he wanted. And I would have been happy if he had just left her alone, if not for the reality that he actually started yelling at her too. Winston, honey, it's time for Emily's bath, and I want her to go in the bath with you tonight. So can you bathe her for me, please?
I don't want Daddy. I want Mommy.
Her Majesty has spoken, Grace. And in any case, I don't want to take a bath with the likes of some rebellious, spoiled brat like that.
Oh, don't get so mad about it, honey. She's just a child, and this is nothing but the rebellious stage. And it's not like she's saying all of those things because she actually means them. It's just part of nature, growing up to be independent. So, you don't have to behave like this. So please give her a bath.
Over my dead frickin' body. I'll never go in the bath with her. You hear me? Never.
Yep. Yes, that's literally what he said, word for word. My husband gets really angry whenever someone goes against what he thinks is the perfect solution, and he doesn't get his way. And I thought he'd never do that to his own children, but apparently I was very, very wrong. His kids were no exception to that rule. And here's another example. Before we got married, we had a fight over whether I should keep my job or quit. And I yelled at him so loudly during the argument that it resulted with him not talking to me for days. And that was extremely detrimental to our relationship because he had already proposed to me and the plans were already underway. And a rift between us started to snowball into something much, much worse. So from then on, I tried hard not to make him angry and to just avoid arguments altogether. But that doesn't mean that it should apply to Emily. Emily is a child and she's growing up, and not only can I not care for Winston, but I shouldn't care for him anyway. I wanted my husband to comprehend the fact that his daughter, Emily, is always going to have a mind of her own. That our kids are not complete copies of us, especially not of him. So I decided to talk to him one night after I put Emily to bed. Winston, listen, Emily is going through a developmental phase right now, and I don't want you to worry about it, okay? It's just a part of growing up. This is what kids do sometimes.
I just don't like it, Grace. She doesn't listen to me at all, and that's really getting on my nerves.
Well, that can only mean that your little girl is becoming a strong, passionate woman. And don't get mad at her for that, okay? Especially her little small outbursts, honey. She loves you, and that is the solemn truth, I promise. And she loves you in her own way, okay? So you two used to be so close, right? Don't you remember? Winston nodded, but the grim expression on his face suggested he didn't want to be convinced. He may be complaining quite a lot, and it might be easier to just let him have his way, but I figured that if I backed down right then, it might affect their relationship in the future, especially Emily's growth. And I wanted her to grow up into a woman who can always speak her mind, unlike me, and have a strong sense of ideas about everything. And that wish is still very true to this day. And that's why instead of giving up arguing with Winston and just, kept talking about it without making any compromises. Eventually, after a few hours of convincing and discussing, I managed to get him to understand why exactly Emily was rebelling more often. And although he still wasn't happy with her behavior, he promised to keep his cool whenever things didn't go as he planned.
I understand. But if I get too pissed off, I won't take care of her anymore. You know more than anybody how little tolerance I have.
I understand. And there was one more thing I wanted to talk about at that point. I'm actually also thinking of going back to work.
Why?
Well, our daughter's growing up and we're going to be spending a lot more money on her, so I'm thinking about starting my job again to give our family a little bit more breathing room and, increase our financial standing.
Are you saying my salary is too low to provide for all of us?
That's not what I'm saying, but once she starts kindergarten, I won't have anything to do at home by myself. And I don't know if you know about this, but most of the time I spend is here taking care of Emily. And once she becomes old enough to go to kindergarten, I'll literally be deprived of the very thing that keeps me occupied here. And I'm going to be, get bored pretty fast, honestly.
Don't try to overturn every decision I've made for our sake, Grace. You ought to just stay at home and take care of the house. Find a hobby or two if you feel too bored to find something productive to do. You're not going back to work.
Needless to say, Winston didn't want me to work so much that he never even showed any willingness to compromise. Emily was sleeping soundly by that point, most likely, and I didn't want to argue so loudly, so I suggested, Okay, so if Emily, just a couple of years from now, like when she's in the double digits, like when she becomes a teenager, when she goes to middle school, can I possibly then go back to work?
Well, I guess that's fine. I'll be honest. I'm more concerned about her school fees than anything else.
My husband finally calmed down and started talking to me rationally. I thought that if I told him directly that we wouldn't be able to keep up with all the expenses using only the money that my husband would bring home, he would get angry and yell at me again. So I couldn't say anything like that, even if I wanted to. And that's how I spent perhaps 30 months living my life as a housewife, being careful about what to say around him and taking care of his feelings. But fast forward a few weeks, he started yelling as soon as something didn't go his way. Essentially, his egotistical tantrums increased dozenfold in intensity and frequency. He yelled at me and Emily, and it really bothered me. Emily is going through a phase, and my husband was also going through a freaking phase. In retrospect, I think it's funny, but during that period, it was literally hell on earth in our house. The only thing that helped me keep my sanity intact was the fact that Emily never ceased to be calm and well-mannered whenever she was with me. She only listened to me, which was a big help considering, well, you know. And perhaps that's exactly why Winston just couldn't seem to understand why Emily was having something known as a rebellious phase. Perhaps he thought that because she was going through that, she had to be as rebellious with me. I'm guessing the reality being the exact opposite was quite a hard blow on him. He may think he is the only one whom Emily doesn't like, but that's just the way it was. Not only did our daughter have to grow and develop, but we also needed to in order to understand her. But maybe it was a task easier said than done for Winston. One evening, I received a phone call from my mother, and when I answered it, she seemed very impatient and anxious. She proceeded to tell me terrible news that my father had collapsed. My first thought was to obviously head to the hospital to see him, but I'll be honest, when the thought of leaving Emily alone with Winston became an option as well, it really made me second-guess myself. I was worried about him and maybe something inappropriate would happen to Emily, but I was in a hurry, so I trusted my husband and left Emily with him for a few hours. And when I got to the hospital, I found my dad lying on the bed with an IV in his arm. I ran over to my mom, who comforted me, saying, "They gave him an IV and he was a little more stable. I'm sorry, I was such in a panic to call you earlier." "Oh, Mom, it's totally fine. So is Dad going to be okay?" For the next few hours, Dad continued to be supported by an IV, and during that time, I've been talking to the doctors about what happened to him. To my great relief, he didn't have a heart attack or a stroke or any other ailments that I feared he could have had. It seemed that it was just fatigue and overworking that have gotten the best of him at this point, and it was taking a big toll on his body and his mind, and that there was no danger to his life, thankfully. I wanted to scold him for overexerting himself to the point of physical and mental exhaustion, but I knew my dad. He loved his work as much as he loved his family, and providing us for as long as he has always been his lifelong passion. At least he collapsed doing what he loved doing, I suppose. About Emily. You left her home, didn't you? Your father's fine now, honey, so you can go home to Emily. Thanks for coming all this way. You're a good daughter. I was told I can go home, so I decided to take my mother on her offer, and I went back. When I left the hospital, it was dark outside, and it was snowing very hard, and the air was quite cold. I hadn't brought a jacket when I drove to the hospital since I was in such a hurry to get there, and after battling a brief gale of powdery snow and howling winds, I found my car, got inside, and drove back home. When I got back home, my husband was having a glass of wine by himself. I was relieved that he had put Emily to bed, and I told him that my dad was okay. But he was irritated for some reason. When I tried to talk to him, he only responded with, "Oh," or "uh-huh." I went to Emily's room thinking his mood was one of his usual fits of meaningless rage and frustration. I opened her door quietly, tiptoed over to her bed, and brought back the covers to catch a glimpse of her head. Underneath the covers was a pillow, but Emily was not in her bed. Alarmed, I looked around the room anxiously. She was nowhere to be found. I descended down the stairs quickly, and I strode to the room where Winston was still drinking his wine as he read his book. "Hey, where's Emily? I went to her room to check to see if you put her to bed, but she wasn't there. I looked around her room, but I couldn't find her."
Oh, that little brat? I kicked her out 4 hours ago because she just wouldn't frickin' listen to me. That ought to teach her to always do what I tell her, eh?
What the hell are you talking about?
As per frickin' usual. She refused to listen to me whenever I tried to talk to her. Calmly, mind you. I tried to punish her by putting her in the back room, but she just would not shut the hell up. It kept calling, "Mommy." I then tried to give her dinner. And when we were eating, she kept saying, "Make this smaller." She wouldn't eat anything if I didn't do what she ordered. Taking care of Her Majesty the Queen brat face, and it was too much trouble. So I took her outside and I left her there.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I could not understand how anyone could kick a 2-year-old little girl out of the house into a raging blizzard and calmly have a drink by themselves. But I knew that this was no time to be having an argument with Winston, to whom I had so many things to say. My maternal protective instincts immediately kicked in, and I ran out of the house with such a speed my vision blurred for a solid moment. My heart was on the verge of going ballistic as I began to suspect the worst had happened. Oh, please, please no. I found myself plowing through blowing snow, and I looked frantically around town for my daughter. I looked for her in the park where she always played, but she was not there. Nor was she on the street where we usually walked to go to the supermarket together. I couldn't find her at all. I knew there was no way I could find Emily by myself, so I called the police. I was running around, out of breath and beginning to be out of hope, when I heard a familiar voice calling me from behind. Standing there, amidst the intense wind and whirling snow, was my neighbor, Miss Kobayashi. Miss Kobayashi is a neighborhood grandmother in her early 60s who always told me stories about her grandchildren whenever I saw her. She can be a bit long-winded and a bit of a nosybody, but she's not a bad person whatsoever. I always enjoy my talks with her, and she often provided me with excellent advice about how to take care of a stubborn child. Emily and I have visited her home a few times.
Grace, my dear, may I have a word with you?
Oh, Miss Kobayashi, I'm very sorry. This is the worst time to have a chat.
It's Emily, isn't it? Emily's at my home.
I was wondering how Miss Kobayashi knew my attitude had something to do with Emily. Miss Kobayashi's house and mine are separate by about a 2-minute walk, and even though she lives very close by, Winston said he kicked her out 4 hours ago. So I didn't think it was possible that she found Emily around that time.
About 4 hours ago, I heard a child crying outside, and I suppose I don't need to explain how I am as a person, given our talks together, but I was wondering what was going on, and when I opened the front door, I saw a shadow in front of my house. I stepped outside, and I discovered it was Emily, your daughter, crying as she walked by my house.
Oh, so that's what happened. Do you mean to say you've been keeping her with you this whole time?
Oh, yes, dear, I was. With Mr. Kobayashi's help, of course. Truth be told, I was very concerned about her.
According to Miss Kobayashi, Emily said she was so scared that her dad had kicked her out of the house and that her mom was gone. And the reason why Miss Kobayashi was worried was because of what appeared to be transpiring before she found Emily outside. She heard Winston yelling at Emily, and his voice was so loud that she could even hear it amongst the wind and the howling of the snow and everything. And Emily's cries were echoing in the streets as well. And since Winston had yelled at her several times before in the same loud voice that could reach even the Kobayashi's house, she thought it would be better to tell me first rather than telling Winston to stop with his stupid bullshit. When I went to the Kobayashis, following the kind old lady inside, I found my daughter peacefully asleep, and I was so relieved to see my daughter safe and sound that I lost all my strength right then and there, and I collapsed to the floor. Mentally, I felt completely shattered. It took all my willpower to keep myself from crying.
If you don't mind, you can tell me what happened, dear. I'm here for you.
I decided to tell Miss Kobayashi everything. How my husband was as a human being, how Emily had been going through a rebellious phase for about a month, and how Winston reacted to her behavior. This kind old lady listened intently, with her face full of sympathy, her eyes twinkling with compassion. Perhaps 15 minutes had passed since I started talking, and I finally finished explaining everything.
Oh, I see. You can stay at my house tonight.
Oh no, Miss Kobayashi, I hate to impose.
Let's be rational here, my dear. I think the both of us would rather let little Emily sleep here, slowly, peacefully, than wake her up now and take her home. And I think she'll feel safer with you by her side when she wakes up.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, nonsense, my dear. It's only neighborly hospitality, and we'd love to have you both here.
Thank you, ma'am. If you insist, we'll take your word for it. I decided to stay at Miss Kobayashi's house that night. The next day, I thanked Miss Kobayashi and her husband for their hospitality, and I went home with Emily in my arms. My husband had already left for work when I got back, so the house was quiet. I was furious at the fact that he didn't seem to care about where his own daughter was, but Emily seemed relieved that he wasn't there.
Mommy, Daddy's not here. The Daddy's really scary.
I'm sorry he scared you, sweetheart. Don't worry, I'm here with you now, and I'm not going to let anyone give you a scary time again. Emily hugged me tightly in response. That moment made me vow to let hell break loose for Winston. I could not allow her to be scared like this, of her own father. No less. He screwed up, and he was to pay big time. As the parent, the paranoid part of my mind started acting up, and holy shit did it give me equivalent of nightmares and daydreaming. What if my daughter had been kidnapped? What if my daughter had stepped out of the sidewalk in the dark and fallen into the river? My heart crumbled to pieces, and I found myself trembling with fear of the possibilities that thankfully didn't transpire the previous night. And that's how sensible a parent should feel. But not my husband. I feel like I couldn't raise a child with him, and I couldn't imagine being with him at all anymore. Right then, I made up my mind to get a divorce. I packed up my belongings so that I could leave the house before he came home. I packed my car with the bare necessities, and then I drove to Miss Kobayashi's house again. Thank you for your help yesterday, and I'm so sorry to take advantage of your hospitality again, but is it okay if I can just leave my daughter here with you for just a little while? My husband and I decided to get a divorce, but I need to discuss it with him, and you understand that it would not be an appropriate place for my child to listen to that.
Oh, yes, of course, dear. It's a pleasure to watch over Emily, don't worry. And as a matter of fact, she has actually become very attached to our Coco. She made him go right to sleep after they had their fun. So, by all means, take your time, be careful, and talk things through thoroughly, okay?
And Miss Kobayashi gladly accepted my request, so I bowed deeply and returned home. And just as a side note, Coco is the Kobayashi's beloved beagle. When my husband came home from work later that day, his first words were,
You're home. So what happened to that girlie? Couldn't find her, I guess. Wait, if you're in this house, then you must have found her, huh? There's a lot of houses around here, so someone must have been taking care of her all this time, right? I knew someone would. I'm such a genius. Well, now that she's been through that, she'll now know better than to disobey me, won't she?
He had the audacity to laugh and just be smug about the whole incident. I was furious with him, but I ignored his atrocious remarks and slammed the divorce documents on the table. And what it was that he was looking at, he started yelling at me again.
What the hell are you talking about? I'm the one who's supporting you and you're divorcing me?
If you think I can stay with a man who can treat my daughter like that and drink with impunity, as though what he did was something completely normal, well then, I suggest you get a brain surgery, Mr. Vader.
But you found her, didn't you? If she's alive, why make a fuss about it? It's part of the discipline that comes with raising a child.
Do you even know what you're talking about? What you've done to my daughter is a legitimate act of physical abuse. We're only having this conversation now because Emily is still alive. But you're a criminal, Mr. Vader.
Okay, now you're overreacting. That's your problem. You always make ridiculous mountains out of molehills, and it makes a simple situation look stupid complicated. If you just kept your mouth shut, maybe she would have come back. You just had to call the police, eh? After you left, the police came to question me. And it was a real frickin' hassle, I gotta say.
So what did you say to the police when they asked you what all the fuss was about?
I told them she unlocked the door and walked out while I was taking a bath, and they believed me. It would have been a disaster if I got caught for that.
My husband was still laughing, and I was genuinely terrified. I was talking to a goddamn psychopath. As long as it's good enough is good enough for me, ain't it? That's your freaking philosophy in life, isn't it?
I understand that the earliest stage is hard, and I understand that her attitude toward him could be upsetting to him. But the truth remains, she is still your child, the child you vowed to raise and protect until she became old enough to live on her own. And yet you lie to the police who are looking for her, and you don't even look for her yourself. I'm sorry, I really can't do this with you anymore. I'm going to live with Emily alone. And if she stays with someone like you, she'll live in fear for the rest of her life, and I just can't do that anymore. Perhaps that was when Winston finally realized that I was genuinely furious, and that the situation really was as grave as I claimed it to be. And he became dead serious and quiet.
Look, I'm sorry about what happened. I'll just say I'm sorry, okay? I won't do it again, I promise. Please forgive me. You don't have a job. You'd be in trouble without me. You can't raise Emily on your own. This is one of the reasons I made you a stay-at-home mom.
Sorry? What was that?
Even if you were selfish and eventually wanted a divorce, you wouldn't be financially feasible. I can't do housework, and considering public reputations, you wouldn't want to divorce me for fear of ruining our individual images to the world.
He literally just admitted he had no freaking humanity with him. Not even a single drop. He really was a psychopath. Winston is just living his life for himself and for no one else. He pretends to care about the people around him, but he's really just trying to protect himself by caring about other people. All those devious schemes simply because he cares about himself and himself only. I was so disgusted. Sign the divorce papers, because if you don't, I'll tell the police exactly what happened yesterday.
You're gonna turn your husband into the police? You're really gonna do that? Besides, I say I'm not gonna divorce you because it's for your own good.
I want you to divorce me for my own good, Mr. Vader. For my own good and for Emily's too. So just sign the papers. And if you don't, well, do I need to repeat myself again? I pulled out my phone and I was about to make a phone call when he impatiently picked up the pen and signed the documents. Good. Now I'm going to talk to my lawyer about the future, and I'm going to charge you child support, so please be reasonable, and if not, well, I don't have to repeat myself again, do I?
I get it.
I took the divorce papers and I left the house. Things went smoothly thereafter, and Winston and I got a divorce. Since then, he's had a very difficult time because I'm not home to take care of the housework, and he's not getting his way in life. As a result, he became even more irritable and started to lash out at work whenever things didn't go his way, even the most smallest things. Because of this, multiple senior officers scolded him, and his subordinates lost their trust in him as well, and he's losing his respectable place in the company. But Winston didn't notice this, and didn't strive to make any changes to himself, and as a result, he wound up having the same attitude to his clients, which in turn snowballed into a disheartening amount of complaints. Ultimately, he was fired from his job, and even after that, his personality still never changed, and he was not able to keep a job at any company, so he moved from job to job, no stability whatsoever in his life, and nothing was going well. So then he started to become mentally ill, and he is now in a mental hospital seeking psychiatric help. I guess he couldn't understand that there absolutely is no way things always went according to how you wanted things to be. And that is the very reason why life is just fun and exciting, because you never know what to expect. As for Emily and myself, I decided to go to my parents' house, bending down in legitimate fear every time she was scolded, but I kept hugging her and loving her all the time when I wasn't angry. And now she knows the difference between what she should do and not do, and what she is allowed to do. I kept in contact with my old boss these past couple of years, and I was able to get my bookkeeping job back, and now I work full-time to support my daughter. I vow to continue to watch her grow, and I will do my absolute best to try and give her a life rid of sadness and fear. Wish us luck.